As you guys have probably noticed, we have finally got our 2022 Toyota GR86. They're starting to pop up more and more everywhere, which is great to see. There's already a bunch of awesome communities in the car groups, online and in the forums. I actually have a Facebook group dedicated to the new GR86 and BRZ, so if you guys are interested, I'll drop that link down below so you guys can join in. But with that being said, one of the most common questions I see about these cars is what parts from the first generation are compatible for this new one, and it's a very valid question. Maybe you had a first gen that you sold to get this new one and you have a bunch of used parts that you want to install, or you're just wondering what you can buy right now and install right away. Either way, we're going to go through some of the most common and popular modifications to figure out what fits and what doesn't. We're gonna start with the easy stuff on the outside of the car. Now, unfortunately, in Iowa, we are required to run a front plate. But of course, I didn't want the dealer drilling nasty holes in our front bumper. So instead, we're gonna be running a license plate relocation kit when we're out driving the car. This is the same one that I run on my FRS from Grimspeed. So I took it off my car and it threads perfectly into the stock tow hook location on the passenger side of our GR86 with no issues whatsoever, which means our bumper can remain untouched. Speaking of the tow hook location, because we're planning on tracking this car, I also pulled the tow hooks from my FRS to test fit. Now, one thing to note, Racing, the maker of these tow hooks, has it listed that the rear tow hook from the previous gen fits the front of these cars, and then the rear tow hook for these cars has a new part number. But when I was testing things out, the front tow hook from my FRS actually fit just fine with the front of the car and the rear of the car, but my rear tow hook from the FRS was a little bit short on the rear of this car, so I wouldn't recommend running that. But if you have a front tow hook laying around, it should work out just fine. Moving over to the side of the car, we are going to talk about wheel spacers. One of the most inexpensive ways to get the wheels flush with the fenders, whether you like the look of your stock wheels and plan on keeping them, or you have a long wait for aftermarket wheels but still want the car looking a little bit more aggressive. Because they retain the 5x100 bolt pattern, any of the wheel spacers from the previous gen bolt right up like so. These are the Faction Fab wheel spacers. I've got both the 20 and 25 millimeter here today, so we're gonna test fit both on the car, and I'll show you guys how they look. While we're over here, I may as well throw on my FRS wheels to see how they look. Wheel fitment, especially in the rear of this car, is probably gonna be where most people struggle with because you aren't able to run as aggressive of a setup as you were in the past. You'll run into rubbing issues if you haven't cut or trimmed the fender. Now, both of these wheels are 17-inch wheels. The Apex EC7Rs are 17x9 plus 35, and then the white 57 CRs are 17x9 plus 38, both with 245/35 tires on them. As you can see, there's a ton of poke with these. I haven't messed with the alignment, so you could dial in more camber to help, but there's still gonna be rubbing issues in the rear if you don't trim or cut that fender. So I'd recommend going with a less aggressive offset, something like a plus 40 or plus 45. We also need to talk about the brakes. Thankfully, they made it easy for us, and the pads, rotors, and lines should all swap over. I'll pull the pads from the front and rear to show you guys. So this is the stock pad. And this is a pad from the first gen. And that fits right in. Same thing for the rear. Pull this one out. And this is actually a pad from my FRS. One thing to note with the brakes, if you're looking to install a big brake kit, because the BRZ has different knuckles than the GR86, they've got the aluminum knuckles, some people are running into fitment issues with those knuckles, whereas on the GR86, the existing kits are bolting right up, so that's definitely something you want to keep in mind if you're looking to go that route. That brings us to the suspension, which is a breath of fresh air because most of the parts are compatible on the new car. So if you have coilovers, lower control arms, trailing arms, tow arms, or sway bars, you can install those on the new car. I actually have the aftermarket rear sway bar from our BRZ mocked up on this car, and as you can see, the fitment is identical. Since we're underneath the car, let's talk about the exhaust. Everything actually fits up just fine besides axle backs. However, with the header, this header has a pipe diameter that's a little bit larger than the previous gen. So if you put an existing header on here, it may not be ideal for the performance side of things, but it does bolt right up, just like the overpipe, front pipe, and catback. With the catbacks, you need to make sure that you're not running into any clearance issues because the rear bumper is different, some catbacks may sit too close to the bumper and cause some melting, which is obviously no good. I know some companies are redesigning their catbacks to make sure they fit perfectly with this car. For example, the Remark exhaust that I'll be installing on this car later on to get you guys exhaust clips. Take a look inside the engine bay. A lot of people like to swap out that air filter. Any of the 2017 and up air filters should fit inside that air box, but the intake system themselves are not compatible, and that is because the mass airflow sensors are different. This one in my right hand is the previous gen, and this is the new one. The mounting locations are just a little bit different, so that's gonna need to be revised before those intake systems are gonna be compatible with this car. For those of you looking to run a strut tower brace or bar from the previous gen, you may run into a few different issues. I'm running the Grim Speed bar on my car that I try to test fit on here. Unfortunately, the intake manifold sits a little bit higher on this car, so that bar actually makes contact with the engine cover, so that's not compatible. And then if you look over on the passenger side strut tower, on top you'll see a new bracket that holds the battery harness in place, and that is gonna get in the way of the mounting brackets that sit on top of here. I've seen people remove that bracket and cut the stud down, but that's not something I'd recommend. I'm sure the manufacturers are working on revising the design so that it's compatible without any modification. On the driver's side strut tower, I also tried to test fit the Grimspeed master cylinder brace that I have for my car, but this hard line gets in the way. So any master cylinder braces that usually sit flat against this strut tower are not going to be compatible because of that line. Hopping inside the car, there's a couple things to talk about. The first being something that you're gonna be touching the most every time you drive the car, and that is the steering wheel. Any of the aftermarket 2017 and up steering wheels are gonna be a direct swap, so you don't lose your airbag or steering wheel controls. So if you want a carbon fiber, Alcantara, or a perforated leather steering wheel, those are available. The next thing is the e-brake. The e-brake handle and button are the same. So if you want a carbon fiber e-brake handle, some sort of drift button, those are super easy to install. One bummer is the shift knob. This is the stock shift knob out of my FRS, and while it threads onto the car just fine, when I go to try to get into reverse, the reverse lockout can't go up because the opening on the underside of the knob is too small. I tried this with a racing knob and a Grimspeed knob, both with the same issues, so that's definitely something to take note of. And then the last thing is the floor mats. Technically, the old floor mats do fit, but because this car no longer has the gas door release on the driver's side, you're gonna have that weird cutout that's just not ideal. That pretty much does it for this video, guys. Obviously, I couldn't install every single part on the car because that's just not feasible, but I tried to cover as much as I could. Let me know if you have any questions and tell me what you guys are gonna be installing first on your car. If you wanna pick up some parts, the links are down in the description. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.